Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video number 10, Virtual PC. This is part of Train Signal Fast Track CBT Video Lab, Microsoft Virtualization, Virtual PC, and Server. In this video, we're going to learn the differences between Virtual PC and Virtual Server. We'll find out how to obtain and install the Virtual PC software. We'll see how you can move a virtual machine from Virtual Server to Virtual PC, and then from Virtual PC back to Virtual Server. And then you'll see exactly how to use Virtual PC hands-on on a real virtual server. But first, let's take a look at our scenario with the Blue Crab Food Company. In this video series, you've learned a lot about Microsoft Virtual Server, but you've also heard about Microsoft Virtual PC. Now, you believe that Virtual PC would be a good application for a help desk technician and system administrators to run on their desktop PCs. This would allow technicians to run a virtual environment and simulate changes without changing their own desktop. Also, it would allow system administrators to create Microsoft Virtual Server virtual hard drive files and then move those onto the virtual server farm from their virtual PC software on their local PC. Now, your task is to download and test Virtual PC. Specifically, see the functional difference between Virtual Server and Virtual PC. Also, test the movement of virtual machines back and forth between Virtual Server and Virtual PC, and vice versa. So now let's learn about the differences between Virtual PC and Virtual Server. And I know that we already talked about this briefly in video number 1, but I just wanted to touch on it because I think it's important to bring up because now we're talking about Virtual PC. Now, the difference between Virtual PC and Virtual Server is significant. Virtual PC is really designed for desktop PC systems. It's designed to run on your desktop. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run Virtual Server on your desktop, but Virtual PC is really just designed to run on a desktop computer. You wouldn't want to run a Virtual PC on a server computer and try to run production virtual machines. So Virtual PC is used for testing and creating virtual machines that you would later move to a virtual server. Virtual PC has a simple user interface. It's easier to get around than Virtual Server. It has good ease of interaction between the host and guest operating systems, so it makes it easier to control the guest operating systems from the host. The virtual computers have better sound and video options than in Virtual Server, and it's ideal for running legacy applications on your desktop like Windows 98 on Windows XP. It's great for help desk testing, IT development, and IT administrator testing, as well as training. So it's a very useful application, but it has its specific uses. Then there's Virtual Server, which is what we've looked at in this video series. It's designed for server systems. It has a complex user interface, but it offers more complex features, and it's created with the one purpose of hosting enterprise virtual applications. It's ideal to use for running server test and production services, server consolidation, and legacy server applications. It offers rapid server reconfiguration and provisioning. Now, the same, or what they both have in common is they use the same file formats for VMC and VHD hard drives. So because they have the same disk file formats, it makes it easy to move virtual servers back and forth from Virtual PC to Virtual Server and from Virtual Server back to Virtual PC. Now, they have similar ways to control virtual machines. They have similar networking features between host and guest, and they have similar disk features like differencing disk. And parts of this comparison up here were taken from the Microsoft TechNet white paper found at this link. But there are differences between Virtual Server and Virtual PC. Virtual PC is designed for the desktop, and it does support sound. Virtual Server is designed for the server operating system running on a more production server with multiple virtual machines all at the same time. It does not support sound. The Virtual PC is really ideal just to run one, maybe two, systems at the same time. Virtual Server can support, as many as 10 or more virtual servers if you have a high enough performance virtual server, the hardware that virtual system is running on. So those are some of the similarities and the differences. So now let's talk about obtaining and installing Virtual PC. Now the good thing is that Virtual PC is free. There's no need to pay anything to use Virtual PC. This is contrary to VMware's Workstation. At, at this point, VMware Workstation is a product you have to buy for about $400. On the other hand, VMware Workstation does have some more complex features than Virtual PC does. Virtual PC 2004 can be downloaded from this link, and at the time of this video creation, Virtual PC 2007 beta is available and it can be downloaded from this link. So I'm going to go ahead and just download the current production version of Virtual PC 2004. Before we do that, let me just review with you what Virtual PC 2007 is going to offer. First off, like Microsoft Virtual Server, it's going to offer hardware-assisted virtualization. So it includes support for the virtualization technology that's built into some of the newer microprocessors from Intel and AMD. And hardware-assisted virtualization is enabled if the feature is enabled on the physical computer. Virtual PC 2007 includes support for Windows Vista as a host operating system. That's important. You can already run Windows Vista as a guest operating system, although it does seem to run very slowly. It uses a lot of system resources, and even with the virtual machine editions, Windows Vista for some reason runs much slower than Windows XP when it's run inside a virtual machine. Now, perhaps Virtual PC 2007, if you use Windows Vista as a host operating system and then you run Windows Vista in the guest, perhaps there's some, better performance you'll get out of that. But Virtual PC 2007 does support Windows Vista as a host operating system. There is support for Windows Vista as a guest operating system. So like I was saying, perhaps with using Virtual PC 2007, you'll get better performance out of Windows Vista as a guest operating system because it is supported. I know I've run it in Virtual Server 2005, and it just runs very, very slowly, and perhaps that's because some of the performance issues, and maybe it's just not supported at all at this point, and it will have better performance inside Virtual PC 2007. Then there's support for 64-bit host operating systems. So that means that you can run Windows XP 64-bit and run Virtual PC on top of that, and then run virtual servers underneath, 32-bit virtual servers, of course. Because it says here, notice that there's no support for 64-bit guest operating systems. So even though you have a 64-bit processor and you run a 64-bit host operating system and you run Virtual PC, there's no support for 64-bit guest operating systems. But hey, at least you can run it with a 64-bit host operating system. That's an improvement. So now let's go up here and let's go ahead and download Virtual PC 2004. I'm going to go over here and click on this link. All right, and this takes us to the home page on the Microsoft website for Virtual PC 2004. Here you can read the product overview. They talk about the Virtual Hard Drive Test Drive program, the Virtual 2007 beta, how Virtual PC is now free. There's also some frequently asked questions, news groups, the weblog, technical overview. But what we want to do is we want to obtain the software by downloading it. So I'm going to click on Get Free Download. It talks about the requirements here, and to download it, we'll go to the Microsoft Download Center. And this takes us to the download for Virtual PC 2004 Service Pack 1. This is an 18 megabyte file. If we scroll down, it talks a little bit about the system requirements. Let's go ahead and download the software. I'll save the file here to my desktop. It'll take just about 20 seconds to download it. Like I said, it's only about 18 megabytes. So that'll be done in just a second. All right, so we have our Virtual PC 2004 Service Pack 1 software right here. I'm going to go ahead and extract it. All right, and now we have our folder of our extracted files. I'm going to go ahead and go in here. There's a subfolder, and then right here, here's the setup to install Virtual PC 2004 Service Pack 1. Now, before we go through with the installation, I still have Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 running on this computer. So, and I even have a started virtual machine running as well. So what I want to do is go open the web interface for Virtual Server. And so I have this Blue Crab Food domain controller running here. If we go into edit the configuration for just a second, just so you are familiar with what this server has on it. It has 384 megabytes. It has 3 hard drives, 1 IDE and 2 SCSI. It has a CD-ROM drive that's attached to Windows Service Pack 1, or Windows 2003 Server Service Pack 1 ISO. Has a SCSI adapter, has a network adapter connected to our wireless network. So just keep these things in mind, because what we're going to do is move this server to Virtual PC and run it over there. And you'll see not quite everything is, exactly compatible or the same. It does move over, but you have to be aware of the differences. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this off. It's not a good thing to do to a production server, but it gets it off quickly. And I'm going to close out the web-based interface there. Now, when we run setup of Virtual PC, if we have Virtual Server services running, it'll tell us, sorry, you cannot install Virtual PC because Virtual Server service is running. So you have to stop it before you can install Virtual PC. So I'm going to go to Programs, Administrative Tools, Services. If I scroll down to the bottom, here's the Virtual Server service. And I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Okay, so that's stopped, and that will allow us to install Virtual PC. Now you can have both Virtual PC and Virtual Server installed on the same computer, and in fact, once you get Virtual PC installed, you can go back and you can start the Virtual Server service and you can get it running again. So you can have actually both of them running at the same time. Obviously, you don't want virtual machines running the same virtual machine, under each of the products, but you can add a virtual machine, to one, then take it off, then add it to the other one, then take it off, then add it back on the first computer. And that's what we'll be doing here. And you'll be seeing, the issues involved in doing that. It's not perfect, but it does work. So now let's go ahead and run our setup. So this says, welcome to the installation of Microsoft Virtual PC 2004. I'm going to click Next. We have to accept the end user license agreement and click Next. Here we type in our username. We already have our populated product key, and this will be installed for anyone who uses this computer. I'll say Next. The default directory is C:\program files / Microsoft Virtual PC. I'll take that default. It's a pretty small program, so it doesn't take very long to get installed at all. There we go. It's installed. So I'll say Finish, and we can close this out. And now let's go back to our slides. All right, so we just learned how to obtain Virtual PC. We downloaded it from the internet for free. Then we learned how to install Virtual PC. A very small program, very easy to install. We did find out that we had to stop Microsoft Virtual Server service before we could install Virtual PC. So that's something important if you for some reason wanted to try out both products on the same computer, like I'm trying to demonstrate here. So now let's move on to our next slide. And we'll talk about moving a virtual machine from virtual server to virtual PC, and then from virtual PC back to virtual server. So on the Microsoft Virtual Server Frequently Asked Questions website, you'll find the following important question and answer. So the question from the website is, are virtual machines created with virtual PC compatible with virtual server and vice versa? And it says that yes, virtual machines with either product are compatible, but when using virtual server and virtual PC together, there's several points to consider. First off, sound cards. Virtual server does not include an emulated sound card in its virtual machines, while virtual PC does. If you're using a virtual machine on both virtual server and virtual PC, you should disable the emulated sound card in virtual PC. This will prevent the sound card's plug-and-play compatible or capability from causing errors on the virtual machine that you created with virtual server. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're using the same virtual machines between virtual server and virtual PC, you should disable the emulated sound card in virtual PC. All right, next one up is SCSI support. Virtual server provides SCSI support while virtual PC does not. If you create a virtual machine with a virtual SCSI disk on virtual server, the SCSI disk will be ignored if you move the virtual machine to virtual PC. This can lead to negative consequences in many situations. For example, if the virtual machine page file on the SCSI disk, or if you're trying to use a SCSI disk as a startup disk. If you plan to regularly move virtual hard disks between machines created with virtual PC and virtual server, we recommend that you attach the virtual hard disk only to a virtual IDE bus in virtual server. So what this means to you is if you're going to be moving virtual machines back and forth from one to the other, make sure that they have IDE disk, on both, that you're only using IDE disk inside virtual server where you can also use a SCSI disk. If your computer or your virtual machine has SCSI drives that you've added, those will just be ignored when you move them over to virtual PC. So it's not really a problem. You just won't be able to access anything that's on those SCSI drives. The IDE drives, of course, work fine. And then just make sure you don't use a SCSI drive as your boot drive, because if that's ignored when you move it to virtual PC, then that virtual machine isn't going to boot up. All right, the next thing, save states. Save state files, or .vsv files, between virtual PC and virtual server are incompatible. When moving a virtual machine between products, be sure to completely shut down the guest operating system. So you don't want to do a save state on either one and then try to move that virtual machine from one to the other. Don't do it. Just make sure that you shut down the virtual machine completely before it's moved from either virtual PC to virtual server or from virtual server back to virtual PC. All right, CD-ROM drives. Although virtual server allows for virtual machines with multiple CD-ROM drives, virtual PC supports virtual machines with only one CD-ROM drive. So if you're moving a virtual machine between the two products, you should configure only a single CD-ROM drive on the virtual machine and attach it to the secondary channel 0, which is always the default setting. So again, make sure that if you have a CD-ROM drive configured in virtual server, it's attached to the secondary IDE channel 0, and you only have one. So keep that in mind. If you have other CD-ROM drives, when you move them over to virtual PC, they're just not going to be recognized anymore. So these are some important points, to keep in mind when you move these virtual machines back and forth from one computer to the other. One of the great things that happens is those virtual machine editions are compatible. So the virtual machine editions that you install that synchronize the mouse and the video and provide some other performance features, those are compatible. So if you install them in virtual server, you move the virtual machine over to virtual PC, your mouse synchronization still works. So that's a great thing. And all these, this question and these answers we just went through, by the way, are taken from the Microsoft Virtual Server Virtualization Frequently Asked Question website. That's this website right here. If you need the link, if you want to go read more about Microsoft Virtual Server and Virtual PC Frequently Asked Questions. All right. Also note that if you move a virtual system from virtual server to virtual PC, and it blue screens after boot up with an error on the driver Intel PPM, This is a known issue. The computer will do a dump, a blue screen, a dump of memory, then it will reboot automatically, and the driver that caused the error will be disabled. At least it's smart enough to disable that driver, and the computer will reboot, and you'll be able to use the system just fine. That driver will be disabled. It's not a required driver, and then things will just work. So for some reason, if the issue continues, before you transfer the virtual machine from virtual server to virtual PC, you should do the following. And this is from the MSDN blogs right here. These are some instructions on going into the registry and changing this value on the Intel PPM on the start, change that value to 4. Now, I've seen this problem myself, and it has to do with using certain processors. So, for instance, the Centrino processor, and I think it's the AMD K8 processor. If you're using that processor, and that's where you created your virtual machine and virtual server, and that was the processor on that system, it'll have this Intel PPM enabled. Then when you move it over to Virtual PC doesn't support that, and that's what causes the blue screen. But fortunately, it would just blue screen once, then it would reboot, and then the virtual machine would work fine. So it really doesn't affect the functionality. It's just something that's, annoying and a little bit scary to see your blue screen crash only to reboot and then function fine. So just one of the issues, that you might have when you're moving virtual machines back and forth from these two products. But for the majority of virtual machines, most of the time, you don't have any problems doing this. So we're about to do it, and let's see exactly how it works. Before we do that, let's move on to our next slide. So now let's learn about using Virtual PC. And what we're going to do is we're going to import a virtual machine created in Virtual Server 2003 over into Virtual PC 2004, Service Pack 1, and we'll see how that works. Then we'll go through all the different controls and configurations and learn how to use Microsoft Virtual PC. All right, so I'm going to minimize our slides, and let's go to the Start button. I'm going to go to Programs, and you see here we have our new icon, Microsoft Virtual PC. When you install Microsoft Virtual PC, that's all you get right there. That's your one single icon that you installed, the Microsoft Virtual PC icon. So I'm going to click on that. All right, and this brings us up to the Welcome to the new Virtual Machine Wizard. And what this wizard does is it helps you create and configure new virtual machines or add an existing virtual machine to the Virtual PC console. And it tells us the virtual machine configuration files are stored in a .vmc file, the VM virtual machine configuration files. And we know all about that from Microsoft Virtual Server 2005, right? They use the same virtual machine configuration files. And in fact, that's what we're going to be importing. So I'll say next here. And then this gives us the option to create a new virtual machine, use default settings to create a virtual machine, which would take an existing VMC file, but it would disassociate the virtual hard disk that was associated with that VMC file, and you'll have to select a new one and create a new one for that virtual machine. The third choice is to add an existing virtual machine. So it takes a VMC file along with the associated virtual hard drive and brings that into Microsoft Virtual PC. And that's what you should be able to do between these two applications. So, in our case, we have Virtual Server installed on this computer already. So we have our virtual machines readily available. But in your case, maybe someone gave you a copy of a virtual machine. They said, oh yeah, you're trying out Virtual PC for the first time. Well, let me give you a copy of a Windows XP workstation or a Windows 2003 server that I have that I've been using in Microsoft Virtual Server, and you could try it in Virtual PC and see if it works. So that's a good scenario, or a realistic scenario at the Blue Crab Food Company. Now, I'm obliged to tell you that legally, Microsoft Windows virtual machines, when you move them from one computer to the other, of course, you have to have a license for that new virtual machine that you're bringing into your computer. So every virtual machine you're running you're obliged to have a license for. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a virtual machine right here. Add an existing virtual machine. So in our case, let's say that our friend already gave us this virtual machine and we already copied it over to our local computer. In reality, it really came from our copy of Microsoft Virtual Server. So I'm going to say next. Okay, now it asks for the name and the location of the virtual machine that we're going to add. So what I can do is browse to that. And we're looking again for VMC files. So we know where those are from Microsoft Virtual Server in all documents and settings, all users, shared documents, shared virtual machines. And here's our folders for the different virtual machines we have in Virtual Server. I'm going to go into this one. Let's go ahead and bring in this Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. So there's the full path to the VMC. I'm going to say next. And the default is when I click Finish to open settings. So I'm going to click Finish. All right, and it tells us that the hardware standard for the virtual machine is not recognized. The virtual machine can start, but some settings may be changed and some settings may not be used. I'm going to check that there to not show this again. This is normal when bringing virtual machines from Virtual Server into Virtual PC. And it's just telling you that, hey, some of those features you have configured aren't going to work in Virtual PC. But fortunately, we already learned about that. We learned about exactly what will work and what won't work. We know that SCSI disk won't work. We know that we can only have one CD-ROM and it has to be on the secondary IDE channel 0. We know that, let's see, what else? Oh, we might have some issues with the network. So there's some different things that do and do not work. So let's keep that in mind. I'll say OK there. And it tells us that the hard disk setting is not supported. So what this means is we've got SCSI disks over on Virtual Server attached to this virtual machine, and we know they're not going to work in Virtual PC. So I'll say don't say this, or don't show this again. And what Virtual PC is going to do is change these settings to be compatible. So basically it's going to make it so that it can bring in this virtual machine. All right, so there's our virtual PC console, and we have our new Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. I'm going to go ahead and click Start on that, and let's get it started. Notice it's saying press any key to boot from CD. That tells me that that ISO file for Windows 2003 Server, Service Pack 1, that boot CD is still there. So we can see that our virtual machine is booting up. And let me go through a little bit of this interface with you for Virtual PC. It's a little bit different than Microsoft Virtual Server. If you notice down here, there's a status bar. See that little hard drive with the light solid? Sometimes it blinks, sometimes it's off. That's the status light for the hard disk activity. Next to that, there's a CD that tells us the status of the CD. Here's a floppy disk, tells the status of floppy, the shared folders, and the network. So this is kind of like our status bar down here. Then up top, if you'll notice, this looks similar to the VMRC that we're used to in virtual server, but we have some different buttons up here. We have an action button where we can enter full screen mode. So it has the same host key, the right alt key, and full screen mode, that's the same, right alt enter. Control alt delete is right alt and delete, that's the same. Then we have pause, reset, and close. We can install the virtual machine additions, or we can check on the properties for this virtual machine. Let's go ahead and go into properties. This is sort of a generic virtual machine properties status page. It tells you about the guest operating system, virtual machine additions, the processor, the video, the memory, memory that's in use for video and code and RAM, some statistics, how many reads, how many writes to the disk controller, Ethernet controller statistics, video frame rate, and then there's an advanced page. So that's the properties, and each virtual machine has its own properties. So this is like the VMRC, but with some added features. If we go into edit, we have copy, paste, and select all. And then we have settings. This is settings for this virtual machine. If I go in here, it tells me that some settings for this virtual machine have been temporarily disabled and cannot be changed while the virtual machine is running or in a saved state. So just the same as virtual server. So it has a name, of course. There's memory. That's where you allocate the RAM for each virtual machine. There's the hard disk. Of course, you can't change this while it's in use. You can create a new hard disk here with the virtual disk wizard, and we'll go through that. So you can have up to 3 hard drives, if you notice here, plus a CD-ROM. So this is really the same IDE bus as Microsoft Virtual Server. You've got up to four drives. You've got 2 buses and two drives on each bus. So up to 4. So these are all IDE, 3 hard disks and a CD drive. Then you can have undo disk, just like in Virtual Server. We've got our CD drive, which can be attached to the secondary IDE controller or not. There's floppy disk, there's COM ports, LPT, there's network adapters. Let me point out that this is different from Virtual Server. The network adapters, because they don't have virtual networks on here, well, I should take that back. They do have virtual networks, but the virtual networks have different names. And your virtual networks that you had in Virtual Server aren't going to come across here. So if you'll remember, this virtual server was attached to a virtual network called wireless over on Virtual Server. Well, over here, if we go to the adapter, what adapter do we want this connected to? What network should this adapter be connected to? There is no wireless network. It only points to real networks plus a local network and a NAT network. So these other networks are the 3 real networks, real interfaces on my computer. So in my case, that wireless network, it really went to this Broadcom 802.11 BG wireless LAN interface that I have on my computer. So what I'm going to have to do is select that over here so that this virtual computer, this virtual machine inside Virtual PC can be on the same wireless network that it was when it was over in Virtual Server. So if I select that and save it, when we move this back, that wireless network is going to be gone again. It's going to be wrong, and I'm going to have to change it back to the wireless network. So it's kind of like the networks aren't really compatible. So when you move them back and forth, you just have to reselect what network you want it to be on. And of course, the SCSI disks that we had over on the other side, those are nowhere to be found. Those are gone. So I'll enable that. Oh, it looks like we booted up here. A service failed for some reason. Yeah, it's still booting. Okay, back here, so we have our network adapter configured. If you go into sound, you can enable sound card on this. But of course, if you did that over on Virtual PC, when you move it back to Virtual Server, sound isn't supported again. So just keep that in mind. There's mouse. It says mouse pointer integration is on. This is a benefit of the virtual machine editions. So the virtual machine editions did come across. Those migrated over here to Virtual PC with us. So they were installed on Virtual Server, but when you bring the virtual machine over to Virtual PC, the virtual machine editions do come along. There's shared folders. This is for sharing folders between the host and the guest. There's display and then the message to come up when you choose to close this virtual machine. All right, our virtual computer has booted, our virtual machine has booted. Let me go through these other 2 options here before we log in. You can go to CD, and here's where you can choose to capture a physical or an ISO image for this virtual machine. Keep in mind it only has 1 CD drive. So right now it already has configured the Windows 2003 server Service Pack 1 ISO CD. So this was configured over in Virtual Server. So this came across when we loaded this computer on Virtual PC. Then of course there's the floppy images and help. So let's go ahead and log into this new virtual machine. We did have an unplanned shutdown. All right, and notice that we have limited network connectivity. Let's open that up. If we go into support here and details, you can see we didn't get an IP address, but I believe that was because this network adapter wasn't connected to the right network when the computer was going through the network configuration. So if we do a repair, now that we're connected to the proper network, this computer should get an IP address so that we can surf the internet. That'll take just a second here. You can see the network activity light down here flashing. You can see our hard drive flashing periodically. All right. We close that out. Let's open Internet Explorer. And there we go. We have internet access. So our virtual machine's up and running. We have internet access. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and let's call this Files from Virtual PC. So I'm going to make just a test file in here. Notes from Virtual PC. So that's my those are my notes. And here's my file folder. It's on my desktop for administrator. And now what I want to do is just shut down this computer. We've proven that it can be brought over from virtual server, and it works fine over here in virtual PC. If you'll notice down here in the taskbar, there's a virtual PC little icon. If I right click on this, this can be used to show the virtual PC console, which is this right here. That's the console. If I click again, I can go into the new virtual machine wizard. I can go into the virtual disk wizard. I can go into options. These are options for virtual PC. How do I want it to restore virtual machines when starting virtual PC? The performance, allocate more CPU to the virtual machine in the active window, or all virtual machines get equal CPU. Pause virtual machines in inactive windows. When the virtual PC is running in the background, run the virtual PC at maximum speed. So these are performance settings. How do you want the performance to work when you're running multiple virtual machines? Full screen mode, adjust the screen resolution so the host operating system is the same as the guest operating system. Do you want to mute the sound? What kind of messages do you want to pop up? What's your host key? What do you want your host key to be? How do you want to capture the mouse? Security, you can set up some basic security options, and then the language. Those options, of course, are also available right here under this file menu. If I right click here again, it shows me my only server, and then I can either choose to start or go into settings for that virtual server. And that's the same thing as up here. I can choose to start this virtual server, go into settings, create a new virtual server, or remove it. So if I go into settings, you can see here now I have access, to change things like the hard drive, the CD drive. Unlike a virtual server, here where you configure the CD drive, you don't configure the ISO file here. You configure the ISO file over in the interface for the virtual machine when it's started. So that's a little bit different. If we go into the hard disk here, we can choose to add a new hard disk. Let's go ahead and just add a new virtual hard disk. We'll just call it new hard disk. That's an original name. We'll make it a dynamic expanding. Notice that they support dynamic, fixed, differencing, and linked. All the same hard drives that virtual server supports are supported in virtual PC. Now, as long as these are IDE drives and not SCSI drives. So virtual hard disk maximum size, 130 gigs virtual hard disk size. What do we want to make it? We'll make it 16. says, are you sure you want to create it? Yes. And it tells us that it was successfully created. And it gives us the full path to it. So now it created it. So now what we have to do is add it. There's our new hard disk. And there we go. Now we have 2 hard disks on this virtual machine. So I'll say OK there. And you can see it's not running here. We did do a proper shutdown. And because we did a proper shutdown, we can actually close out Virtual PC, and we can go start the virtual server service, and we can go and import that virtual machine. Actually, we don't even have to import it. We never even removed it from virtual server. So here, if I go to the virtual server service and I start that, now I do have that computer on the virtual server service configured to start up automatically. So when we start this, it's going to take a little while, and it might even time out because it's going to go and try to start that virtual server automatically. As soon as we get our virtual server service started, we'll go and open the virtual server administrative web interface, and we'll show that we can indeed start up that new virtual server, and we'll see what we have to do to the network to get it working again, since we changed the network adapter that it was attached to. Then we'll also see what happened to our virtual hard disk, the new hard disk that we added over in Virtual PC. So as soon as this starts, you'll see that we can indeed have virtual server and virtual PC running on the same computer at the same time. You just don't want to try to open the same virtual machine at the same time, with both products, or have the same virtual machine running. Normally the virtual server service does not take this long to start up. And again, it's because that virtual machine, that Blue Crab Food Win Server 1, is configured to start up automatically. So it's trying to start the service and then start that virtual machine at the same time. Okay, we got an error, but if we do a refresh here, still says it's starting. If you go into Start, Programs, Microsoft Virtual Server, into the administration website, it says here it's still not done starting. There we go. So that has changed from starting to started. Let's go ahead and close this out and just reopen it. All right, and if you notice, as soon as we go in here, this server is already running. And that's because at one point I had configured it to start automatically. So it went ahead and started the exact same VMC file that we just got done editing inside Virtual PC. So if I go in here to edit the configuration, let's look and see what configuration it has. Since we modified this, notice now that there are 4 virtual hard disks. Before there were only 3 virtual hard disks. And notice that virtual hard disk number 2 is this new hard disk. That's the new hard disk we added over inside Virtual PC. The RAM, of course, is the same. The CD drive is the same. We never changed that. We still have our SCSI adapters. Notice that the network adapter has a big red message here. It says it's not connected. It says the virtual network for this virtual network interface could not be found. The network interface will be left unplugged. So it's not connected at this point. So what we're going to have to do is reconnect it to the proper wireless network. In our case, this is wireless. In your case, it could be something else. It could be external network. Typically, that's what people use. In our case, we're using this network called wireless, which goes to our wireless adapter because that's the adapter I'm using on my computer to attach to the internet. But on your computer it could be something else. We just have to make sure this computer is on the proper wireless network, because those same wireless networks aren't going to match and move over to Microsoft Virtual PC. So at this point it looks like the server's almost booted. I'm going to close that out. We can close this. And now let's go open our VMRC for the Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. And we want to connect to Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. And it tells us the driver failed to start. We'll log in, and sure enough, we were able to log on. And hey, what's that? It's our files from Virtual PC. It's our folder we created. And inside, we have our files. So those files were stored on the VHD, and they were just brought, back and forth from Virtual Server to Virtual PC. We created the folders and the files, and then we brought them back from Virtual PC to Virtual Server. Now, can we surf the internet? Let's check out our network adapter. All right, and we have an IP address, and that's because we connected that adapter to the proper network when we brought it back over to Virtual Server. We also know that we have now that fourth disk drive that we could go in here and we could add if we chose to do so. But I think we proved our point that you can transport virtual systems back and forth from Virtual PC to Virtual Server and vice versa. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Let's go back to our slides. All right, so we learned about using Virtual PC, and that brings us to our conclusion. So in conclusion, in this video, we learned the difference between Virtual PC and Virtual Server. Virtual PCs are really a great product that's dedicated towards desktop users, maybe developers or help desk people or salesmen, or even IT administrators who maybe just want to run one server or two servers at a time, just very basic virtualization. We learned that Virtual PC supports sound, whereas Virtual Server does not. But Virtual Server has some more advanced features like SCSI hard drives, and you can create your own custom virtual networks. Whereas Virtual PC, you just have an internal network and a NAT network, and then you can attach to a bridged network to one of your physical adapters. So the network names between the two are going to be different, and that's something you're just going to have to deal with when you move virtual machines back and forth from one to the other. We found out how the virtual machine editions are compatible. You can move those easily back and forth from one to the other. We saw that you can have both products installed on your computer at the same time, your host computer at the same time, but that you do have to stop the virtual server service before you can install the virtual PC product. After that, though, you can actually restart the virtual server service, and you can have both machines running. You can move virtual machines back and forth from one to the other. You could share these virtual machines, with your friend or colleague who has one of the other products, Virtual Server, and you have Virtual PC, or they have Virtual PC and you have Virtual Server. Many times what people do is they create systems using Virtual PC on their desktop, work with those systems, test them out. Then when they're ready for production, they're able to move those up to the Virtual Server environment into the production environment running Virtual Server. We saw how to obtain Virtual PC. You download it for free from the internet. We saw how to install Virtual PC, very easy, small application. We tested moving a virtual machine from Virtual Server to Virtual PC and back, and we saw some of the issues you might run into when you're doing that. Then we learned how to use the Virtual PC interface. Very simplified, makes things quick and easy just to do all the basic Virtual PC features and configurations that you need to perform basic virtualization. Virtual PC is an excellent product and very useful if it's used in the proper situation. I've enjoyed video number 10, Virtual PC, and I hope that you've learned a lot about Virtual PC and enjoyed it just as much as I have. Thank you very much.